All right, get ready because today we're diving deep into a real ocean mystery, the disappearance of the USS Cyclops.
Oh, yeah.
Picture this. It's 1918, and this massive ship just vanishes. Poof! Over 300 people on board, and it's like they sailed into another dimension. No mayday, no wreckage, no lifeboats, nothing.
It's a case that has baffled folks for over a century, and for good reason. The lack of answers is really unsettling.
Okay, so before we go full conspiracy theory, let's get some background. What exactly was the Cyclops, and what was it doing out there on the Atlantic?
So the Cyclops was a collier, basically a huge floating coal depot for the Navy.
A coal depot.
Yeah, think about it. This thing was 540 feet long.
Wow.
Launched back in 1910, capable of hauling 12,000 tons. During World War I, its main job was keeping those American and Allied fleets fueled up and ready for action. And get this, it had a pretty clean track record before this final voyage.
So not some rickety old tub about to fall apart.
No, not at all. It had made several successful trips across the Atlantic, so it was no stranger to rough seas.
Well, that makes its disappearance even weirder.
Absolutely.
All right, so set the scene for us. When and where did the Cyclops make its last appearance?
Last confirmed sighting,
Yeah.
March 4th, 1918. Departing Barbados, fully loaded with manganese ore and heading for Baltimore. Should have arrived around March 13th.
Give or take a few days for weather and all that.
Exactly. But it never made it.
And of course, this is where everyone's mind goes straight to the Bermuda Triangle, right?
Right.
It's like the poster child for mysterious disappearances.
It's hard to ignore the connection,
Right.
The Cyclops, Flight 19, the Carol A. Deering, they all feed those supernatural theories. Time warps, aliens, the whole shebang.
Yeah, good stuff for a sci-fi movie.
Yeah,
But we're all about the facts here.
Absolutely. And the fact is, there's no scientific evidence to support any of those claims.
Yeah.
Gotta separate the fiction from reality.
Okay, so let's ditch the spooky stories and look at the real possibilities. What about a massive storm? We're talking about the North Atlantic in March, not exactly known for smooth sailing.
You've got a point there. That time of year is notorious for unpredictable and violent weather. There were even reports of cyclones in the area around that time.
So we're talking rogue waves.
Could be. Those things are a force of nature. Imagine a wall of water, sometimes over 100 feet tall, appearing out of nowhere. It could definitely take down even a large ship like the Cyclops.
But wouldn't the crew have sent out an SOS?
Yeah, you'd think so. Even in a chaotic situation, you'd think that would be a top priority.
Right.
That's the problem with the storm theory. Even with a sudden rogue wave, a ship that size should have been able to send some sort of signal. But there was nothing. Complete radio silence.
Okay, so maybe not a storm then. What about the idea that the ship was simply overloaded? Could it have been carrying too much weight?
That's the structural failure theory. It all comes down to the cargo they had on board.
Which was?
Manganese ore. And here's the thing, manganese is much denser than coal.
Oh, okay.
So some experts think the sheer weight of it, especially if it wasn't properly distributed, could have put too much stress on the hull.
So where would the weak points be on a ship like that? Could it have, like, snapped in two?
Think of it like this. You take a thin piece of wood and keep bending it. Eventually, it'll break at its weakest point. Same idea with the ship's hull. Too much weight, especially in the middle, and the whole thing could be ripped apart.
So basically, a huge crack, sudden split, and the ship goes straight to the bottom.
Pretty much. And there's some interesting evidence to support this. Remember those sister ships we mentioned, the Proteus and Nereus?
Uh-huh.
They both disappeared during World War II under similar circumstances. And guess what? They were carrying heavy loads of ore, too.
Now, that's a little too coincidental, don't you think?
It's a pattern that's hard to ignore. And there's another detail. Eyewitnesses in Barbados reported that the Cyclops was sitting really low in the water, like it was weighed down by something heavy.
That definitely fits the story. But even if it sank that quickly, wouldn't there be some debris? I mean, wouldn't something have washed ashore?
You would think, right. And that's the biggest mystery with this theory. If it broke apart and sank that fast, why haven't we found even a tiny piece of wreckage? It's a question that has puzzled researchers for decades.
All right, so we've got the storm theory, the overloading theory, and then there's the big one, World War I. Could the Cyclops have been attacked?
We can't rule it out. We were in the middle of a global conflict. German U-boats were a real threat, and a torpedo attack could definitely explain the sudden sinking and lack of communication.
But wouldn't Germany have taken credit for it? Used it as propaganda?
You'd think so, right? But that's the strange thing. Germany never claimed responsibility. And once again, that lack of wreckage makes it hard to say for sure.
It's like a real-life ghost ship, isn't it? Just gone, vanished without a trace.
A maritime mystery for the ages. And there's one more theory we need to talk about, one that gets into, well, human nature. Mutiny or sabotage.
Wait, are we talking about the crew turning on their captain and sinking the ship on purpose? That sounds a bit out there, doesn't it?
It does. And we have to approach it with some skepticism. But there are a few odd details that make people wonder, like the ship's captain, George Worley. Let's just say he wasn't exactly Mr. Popularity on board.
Really? What was wrong with him?
Some people described him as difficult, maybe even a bit unstable.
So maybe a mutiny over personality clashes. A crew pushed too far.
It's possible. And get this, there were even reports of crew members complaining about conditions and how they were treated before leaving Barbados. It sounds like there was some tension on that ship.
But even if they did mutiny, why sink the ship? Wouldn't they try to take over and escape?
Exactly. That's the biggest problem with the mutiny theory. It doesn't make sense for a mutinous crew to deliberately sink themselves.
So if we're playing detective here, which theory seems the most likely? What's the best explanation for the Cyclops vanishing?
Well, looking at the evidence and keeping it simple, the two most likely scenarios are either structural failure from all that manganese ore, causing a sudden break, or a huge storm, maybe even a rogue wave, capsizing the ship.
Let's break those down a bit more. With the structural failure, we have that super dense cargo, the reports of the Cyclops sitting low in the water, and those two sister ships that also disappeared in similar ways. That pattern is hard to dismiss.
It's definitely convincing, all that pressure on the hull. If it gave way, the ship could have split apart and sunk in minutes, with no time to send a distress call.
And then there's the storm theory. The North Atlantic in March can be brutal, and there were reports of cyclones in the area, but that lack of an SOS is still bugging me.
Rogue waves are a whole other beast, you know. They can be incredibly unpredictable. A massive wall of water, maybe even taller than the Cyclops itself, hitting the ship, it could capsize almost instantly.
Yeah, and with no time to even send a message.
Exactly.
It's a scary thought. Shows the sheer power of the ocean, right?
Absolutely. Even with all our fancy technology, the sea still has its secrets.
So, after more than 100 years, is there any hope of finding the Cyclops? Can modern technology solve this mystery?
People are still trying to find the wreck. Deep sea exploration has come a long way. We have sonar that can map the ocean floor, submersibles that can handle extreme pressure. It's not impossible to think we might find the Cyclops someday.
Imagine that, finding it after all these years, finally getting some answers for the families of those lost.
It would be a powerful discovery, not just for the families, but for anyone who's been fascinated by this mystery.
It's crazy to think a ship that big could just vanish. We're not talking about a little sailboat here. This was a 540-foot steel giant.
It shows just how vast and powerful the ocean really is. Even now, there are forces out there we can't fully understand or control.
It's a reminder of the mysteries that are still out there, hidden beneath the waves.
Makes you wonder what else is down there waiting to be discovered, or maybe waiting to stay hidden forever.
So before we finish up, let me ask you this. If you were leading the expedition to find the Cyclops, where would you start?
Good question. If I were to go on that mission, I'd focus on two main areas. First, I'd really dig into the weather data from March 1918. Look for any signs of those really bad storms or rogue waves along the Cyclops' route. If we could pinpoint where a storm might have sunk it, that would narrow down the search area a lot.
That makes sense. Using the past to try and figure out the Cyclops' last moments, what about the second area? Where else would you look?
I'd look around the old shipping lanes. Even if the Cyclops sank from structural failure, debris could have drifted along those routes and maybe washed ashore on nearby islands. I'd look for old reports of unusual debris washing up in the weeks and months after it disappeared.
Going through old records, hoping to find a piece of the puzzle that everyone else missed?
Exactly. Even a small piece of the Cyclops, if we could prove it came from the ship, that could give us valuable clues to where it ended up.
It sounds like a huge task, but the reward would be incredible. Finding even a little piece of the puzzle after all this time.
It would be a win for history, for science, and for the families who've waited so long for answers.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a pretty good deep dive into the mystery of the USS Cyclops. We've looked at the theories, the evidence, and even thought about where to start looking for its watery grave.
We've covered a lot, and it's clear that this mystery is far from solved.
You know, it really makes you think, doesn't it? This huge ship just disappears like a ghost ship. It shows that even now, with all our tech and everything, there are things out there, especially in the ocean, that we can't really grasp, you know?
The ocean is something else. Powerful, mysterious, Humbling to realize that even in this day and age, it can still keep its secrets hidden.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, haven't we? We've explored all these theories about what happened to the USS Cyclops, from rogue waves to the ship just falling apart, even talked about the possibility of an attack or mutiny. But over 100 years later, the big question remains. What really happened to the Cyclops and everyone on board?
It's a question that still gets to people, and it's a tough one. And while we might never know for sure, the search for the truth, trying to learn more, that's what keeps this mystery so interesting.
Absolutely. So, to our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this. Imagine you're the one leading the expedition to find the Cyclops. Where would you start? What clue, what little piece of evidence would you focus on to try and solve this 100-year-old puzzle?
Would you dig into the ship's logs? Look for any signs of trouble brewing on board? Maybe study old weather charts trying to find the perfect storm?
Let us know what you think. Maybe hold the key to unlocking this mystery of the sea.
Until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop looking for answers.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.